3 words, okay? Happy, adventuresome, and blessed. For as long as I can remember, I called him Dorian Joe. And I felt like they kind of took me more seriously. And anyway, and I think they kind of found it endearing. But my funniest memory of Joe is he was always, with having 3 daughters, worried about, were our skirts too short? Were we acting like ladies? Were we appropriate? And I remember being I think I was a freshman in college, and we were sitting out back on his porch, and there's a big oak tree there, and we were sitting there having coffee, and I had on a long terry cloth robe, appropriately wrapped, and we're having a really nice time. And suddenly he says to me, you're just a little, don't you think you could just go inside and put some clothes on? You're half naked out here. And when he said half naked, it was like a red flag to a bull to me. So I had nothing under my white terry cloth robe. So I just said, really, you think so, Joe? And with that, I took off my robe, dropped it on the ground, and sat down, started drinking my coffee again. And whereupon Joe jumps up, comes, and he had this gorgeous giggle. And he was laughing, he's going, okay, you've made your point, you've made your point. And so he wrapped me up in my robe, and we sat down and finished our coffee, and he was just giggling the whole time, and he said, I hear you, or something like, I have behaved badly, and you haven't. Back when I was dating John Murphy, we had met, we were gonna go meeting Jack Keys, who is still a longtime friend. We had set Jack up with a friend of mine, and we had gone to some restaurant, I can't even remember the restaurant, and there was a crowd, so we were hanging at the bar, and suddenly I heard a party of 4 for Chesnovic to come up. Now, none of you would probably remember the Chesnovics, but they were 2 crazy bachelors on Saturday Night Live. And I burst out laughing. I thought, whoever that is, I want to meet him. And then your father jumps up, and it's him, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I love this guy. My first trip, I was probably a young bride of 24. I know I was. And your dad had turned 33. And he thought at the time, and told everyone, that I had robbed him from the cradle. But it was really important to him that I love Ireland. And Ireland really has become my second home. But that very first trip, I have like 2 pieces that come flooding to my brain. And the first one is that I couldn't get over the landscaping. Whenever we went to Ireland, we made our first trip to Kerry every time we went home. And that very first trip to Kerry, I couldn't get over it. I remember we went on to a beach, and the beach had met directly with a pasture that was like totally green with cows on it. And coming from the panhandle of Texas, first of all, you didn't see green. You sure didn't see a pasture coming right up to a beach with cows on it. And we pulled the car up into the beach, and your father was going to show me, just how they did it in Ireland, swimming in frigid cold water. So he stripped down to his underwear and jumped into this frigid water, came out purple, and quickly threw on his clothes, turned the heater on the car, and we, he dressed and we headed off, and then we got pretty far down the road and he realized he'd left his shoes. Now these are the first really good pair of shoes that John ever bought. They were the ones, and God knows why he was wearing them, but they were his shoes that he'd gotten married in. They were some fancy Italian brand. We went back and they had been swept out to sea. So that's one memory. And then the other one is, again, in Cary, when we're there, the same trip. And all I remember is sitting on this fallen tree, and I was looking at the most spectacular scenery. And it dawned on me, your life is going to be really different now. And John Murphy opened up my world, and that is my favorite memory of my first time in Ireland. I am very, very pregnant at the airport. It was at a time where, before September 11, there were no lines, and you'd walk someone up to the airplane, and I'm standing there, and for some reason he is being very affectionate, overly in front of other people. And then suddenly, as he's about to board the plane, he starts shouting out, I promise, we'll get married when I come back up here." And that was one of your father's favorite stories of embarrassing me in front of my hometown crowd in Amarillo, Texas. So many of all of our memories come from vacations. Some of our best memories are trips that we took, places that we'd been. And in my lifetime reel, when we would go take those car trips from Houston to Canadian Texas, I just have a floodgate of memories of, first it was I was taking one child, and then Megan, and then I was taking two children, and that would be Lauren and Megan. And then, 8 or 9 years later, this little surprise came into our life, Kathleen. There were 3 of you in the car. But as a parent, you had to think of ways to make the trip, first of all, an experience that was halfway pleasant because you're in the car with children for that long. So I started off realizing that the best way to make the trip go smoothly was to get up at 4:30 in the morning and have the car packed, load up some sleeping kids, and we'd be halfway there before they were going, how far is it until we get there? But we played games, we told stories, we stopped in Wichita Falls to see grandparents, and I had Megan and Lauren singing and preparing their songs for my grandfather. Many times we'd stop in Fort Worth because that's where the Kimball Museum was. And I thought that was like the perfect halfway point. You'd be kind of waking up, and I would take you to one of the exhibits that they had. They always had fabulous exhibits. And that's where Lauren coined the phrase museuming. She says, "Oh, Mommy, do we have to go museuming again?" We didn't take long, but we always got to see something special. But one of my fondest memories is how obsessed Megan and Lauren became with the story of Les Miserables. And it was my favorite musical. So I would put, back in the day, we had cassette tapes, and I'd put the cassette tape in the car and tell you the story, whereupon you girls learned all the songs. I thought at the time that I was skipping through the song where the prostitutes were singing. Lovely Ladies, I think the name of it was, and they were singing that song. And so I thought I was skipping through it. However, one day back in Kingwood, Megan was skipping through the house singing "Have a Thick One and a Quick One in the Park." And I went, time out, honey, you can't sing that song. And from there, I had to give my first birds and bees talk. And I remember pulling you girls into the bedroom, Megan and Lauren. Kathleen was just a cloud in the sky at the time. And so I have to explain way more than I was prepared to address at the time. But Megan was at the edge of the bed. I mean, she was taking in every single word. And Lauren was kind of ping-ponging against the walls, not interested at all at the time. And I remember Megan saying to me, "Now, Mommy, you know how Daddy would say, the patient seems to understand everything when they're in the room. And the minute they walk out of the door, they've forgotten everything." She said, "I'm afraid I might be a little bit like one of Daddy's patients. Can I come back and ask you some more questions? Because I think Catherine has it all wrong." And Catherine was her little best buddy and Lauren's, who was kind of the resident expert on sex, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny. And with that, that was my first birds and bees talk. First of all, because of the neighborhood expert, Catherine Seitz, had words with her. And I was relaying this story to my sister Amelia, who at the time lived in San Antonio. And she said, "Oh, Karen, you gotta come to San Antonio. There is this Santa Claus that is so real. He's got the rosy cheeks, he's got the little glasses, he's the real deal. You look at him and he's everyone's dream of Santa Claus, big robust belly." So I thought this is the perfect time to reintroduce Megan to Santa Claus. And I went to the mall where Santa was to be a day early. And I spoke with Santa and I said, "I've got a child who is starting not to believe again." And he said, "Oh, this is perfect." He said, "Write down some things about Megan, and when I see you, I'm going to call out her name." So I wrote several things on a card, and I said, "Okay, I'll be here tomorrow afternoon around 3 o'clock. I'll be with 2 little blonde girls, and you can call her." So we're standing in line, and Megan's starting to be very cool, and it's like huffing and puffing, like, what am I doing here? And suddenly, from his chair, with a long line in front of him, he said, Megan Murphy, come up here." She's turning around, she's like, I said, "Santa's calling your name, get up there." And her eyes are like huge. So she goes up, she sits on his lap, and he starts saying, "Megan, tell me about how you've been behaving." And she said, "Oh, I've been really good." And she said, "Well, you told your mother you would feed your cat, and and the cat's not being fed, and you're really not doing your piano lessons, and yeah, you're doing this and that, but you know, you promised that if you got that cat that you would feed it and that you'd do your piano lessons, and you're not." And her eyes were like saucers. So then she comes dashing back and she says to me, "Gosh, Mom, I got to talk to Catherine because she's got it wrong." Clear blue eyes and this white hair, and she honestly looked like a little cherub angel. And John and I were news junkies, and I had the TV on all the time. And it was a household of noise and turmoil because we were always in a state of turmoil with politics and This was about the time of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And my little cherub, Kathleen, looks at me with her big blue eyes and asks me in the most innocent of voices, "Mommy, what is oral sex?" I went, "Baby girl, it's when they talk about sex too much." And with that, she was quite satisfied and went skipping off. And I went in immediately. Back in the day, we had landlines. And I called the cable company and I said, "I want it off today." It's, so Murphy comes home that evening and he's got out the flicker and he's flicking away and he says, "Hon, you got to call the cable company. The TV's not working." And I said, "Hon, I did. Here's what happened today." And I told him the story and I said, "We don't need this in our household." And with that, the Murphy household didn't have TV for 12 years. And we got it, again, for political reasons. When Obama was running for president, we decided to put it in Kathleen's senior year. So all my children mostly grew up without TV. We still would have movies and family night where we'd watch movies and have pizza, but we didn't have the constant noise, and all the girls became great readers. It was a wonderful thing. September 11th, that was at a time when we didn't have TV. My neighbor, Karen Rapson, knew we didn't, and she comes dashing over that morning of that terrible morning. And there had already been one plane crash into one of the towers. And as we were watching, the second one hit. And you had this sense that maybe the whole country was going to be hit. And it changed our world. But that's where I was. I was at home and I called my husband at work. We were all in a state of shock. And we were fortunate in that because we didn't have TV, you girls weren't seeing the constant replay where it felt like we were all being hit every single day for a long time. But it was a feeling of complete despair for our country, and then for the people that lost their lives there. And as a nation, we were forever changed. There was this saying in our household that your father made infamous: spend a night, not a fortune. And every time we'd go to check in somewhere, which was never a nice hotel, it would be, your dad would say, "We'll go to the nice place and have a drink, but we're going to save money and stay in the cheaper hotel." Except for later in life. But when we got married, we spent our honeymoon night in the Warwick Hotel. And that is close to my home in the Museum District, right down the street from it. And the Warwick Hotel was an iconic, beautiful old hotel. And we spent our honeymoon night there. It was built in, I think, like 1926. And then years later, it was changed to from the Warwick Hotel to Hotel Zaza. But back when it was built in the day, it was opened up Herman Park. It was just a beautiful hotel. And then it was renovated, and it's become this kind of eclectic hotel. But your father arranged for our 35th anniversary for us. It was supposed to be a surprise, but he wasn't really good at keeping secrets. I found receipts everywhere. So I knew that we were going to the Hotel Zaza because he'd arranged a spa day for me, and I found the receipt, and he had, tried to subtly ask me who I'd really like to spend dinner with if I could choose, so close to our anniversary. I was going, okay, who's he going to invite? And we spent it with Bruce and Shawnee Daniels, but I spent my first day of marriage at the Warwick Hotel, and we celebrated our 35th anniversary, which would have been our last one together, and it was just a beautiful evening. He had brought pictures of us when we'd gotten married, our photo album. He looked at the prices, like as only your father would, of how much they charge for a bottle of champagne, and he decided, no, I'm not paying that. So he went out and got it himself and brought the ice bucket and everything so he wouldn't have to pay Hotel Zaza champagne prices. And the only thing that was an absolute surprise were these gorgeous flowers that he had sent that absolutely filled the room. And Megan had done a consultation with her mother-in-law, Judy, about what kind of flowers to arrange. So she made all the arrangements to have this perfect bouquet that was totally fragrant there. And there's not a time I drive past there and I don't think of my first night there and my last anniversary night there. Claire Daisy's birth. I got this phone call Christmas Day. Kathleen and I were in Houston. We had just had Christmas lunch with our neighbors and our brunch, but I got this phone call from Lauren saying, Mommy, I have shaved my legs and I've stopped for a cappuccino, and I am on my way to the hospital to give you a lovely baby girl for a Christmas present. And oh my God, there was so much excitement. Kathleen and I made arrangements to come up here. There's great excitement, and there was some problems with my flight arriving on time, and I arrived late in the morning, or very early in the morning. And I got off the plane and turned on my phone, and I had been getting updates prior to this, like so many centimeters, and it was constant coming, and then there was this big gap. There were no texts, and I started getting panicky, and then I got a call from Joan, Lauren's mother-in-law, and she said to me, Lauren is going to make it, but we're not sure if the baby girl's going to make it. Where I just burst out crying and started trying to gather myself. And I found a taxi driver, or an Uber driver. I was so out of sorts, and I was just a hot mess and crying. And this lovely man asked me when I told him I needed to go to the hospital, and he said, what's going on? I said, well, my daughter's had a baby, and it looks like she's making it, but we're not sure if the baby girl is going to make it. And he asked me, are you a woman of faith? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, we're going to pray right now. And that lovely man sat down with me and kind of brought a sense of calm to me, held my hand, And we prayed for you and for the baby and for the people tending to her. And then he brought me to the hospital, and I hated that I had forgotten to get his card. So it was with all that we spent several days waiting for her, because they put her, as I described it, on ice, where they lower the body temperature. They do this with stroke or heart attack victims. And how fortunate the Ferrara family was, that she was brought to a hospital where that happened. And I have a lot of friends and family of faith. And my sister in Mason pretty soon was on calling everyone in town saying, I want this baby girl being prayed for. And I think every town and every church in Mason, Texas was praying for you. Lisa Rice and Brenda Blackwood had every prayer group that they knew praying for you and Claire. And my sister Jody, the same thing. And then, of course, there was the town of Canadian. But during this whole time, I could feel John Murphy there, watching over her. And when things happened sooner, and just found out that this little girl was going to be fine, and we were going to see her grow up, because we just didn't know at the time what we were looking at, if she was going to make it or how she'd be. And so I was there a bit longer, and one of the memories that I had that will always stick with me is you telling me there are moments in time when they are defining, and you look that Joe was the kind of man that you always then knew you'd made the right decision. And I just think of how blessed your little family was because of John Murphy's presence and the power of prayer, and being gifted with decisions that you went to the right hospital, you had the right staff there. But I'll never forget, I was flying home, and in the back of your head you're thinking, is everything okay? She's going to make it, she's coming home. But I was flying home New Year's Eve, and I arrived in Houston, Texas, I think around 11:30 at night. It takes a little while to get your bags and get in your car, and I start driving. And I have never experienced anything where I'm driving down the road and there were fireworks coming from both sides of the freeway as I'm driving home. I just had never felt such happiness, and I felt like God was giving me this beautiful parade home and telling me everything is going to be okay. And it was.